All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Should I make a start? All right, so welcome, second session of our autumn study here in the still early days of Genesis. You're looking at some of the early part of the story about Abram and Sarai here in a few minutes, but why don't we start our time with a word of prayer. God, we give you thanks for these stories of our faith, and while we may not be able to fully explain or understand every aspect of them, we give you thanks for our freedom of thought to explore them and to discuss them and to learn from each other as we study your word. Be with us during this hour, guide our conversations, and open our hearts and minds as we continue to study your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So before we move into chapters 11 through 14, is there anything we need to follow up on from last time? Any lingering thoughts or questions or anything? I hope not. I probably don't have the answers, but. Okay. All right, well, if something pops up, feel free to speak out. So obviously, we've made kind of a shift now, and well, for some time now, we're going to be following along with Abram, who becomes Abraham, so this is really the early part of his story. Abraham, of course, is known as the father of monotheism, so important to think about that as we go forward. But before we get to the story of Abraham, there's the matter of a very short story at the very beginning of chapter 11. So this would be the Tower of Babel, and so it's well. So let's start off. What's the story about? Why is it important? Why? I mean, it amazes me every time I read it how short it is for this sort of seemingly oversized role that it plays in our spiritual heritage, but also I think just in general, it's one of those stories that gets referred to secularly quite a bit. So what is it? What's the story?
The development of the different languages.
Yes. Why are there different languages? Why are they spoken in different places?
And why did that happen? Why didn't they just keep one language?
Yes.
It would have been a lot better. There would have been a few less wars. Yeah.
Yeah.
The God that did that, right, apparently.
Yeah.
Doesn't it contradict chapter 10 though, where it says people have different languages?
Oh, very good. Okay. Yeah. We'll get to that. Yeah.
It's all looking back, trying to explain why there are different languages, why
Okay.
they can't communicate.
Okay.
But
Why people
well-
aren't all in one place, that they're scattered, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
we usually call it Babel.
It's
Stable.
Who knows?
However you say it.
Well, they are.
All right. You understand me.
There's your answer, really. But they use the word Babel.
About,
Well, I'll get to the name.
It's
I'll get to the
strange,
name.
isn't it?
I'll get to the name. So coming in on what Barry suggested, yes, if we go back and look again at the end of chapter 10, or actually the bulk of chapter 10 is this genealogy tracing from Noah to Abraham, and we talked last time about paying attention to the fact that it's pretty explicit that some of these different lines of the family are speaking different languages. And so when we come to the first verse of chapter 11, it says, now the whole world had one language and a common speech. So I think there's a couple of different things going on here. We've talked before about some of the different voices that we hear throughout Genesis that are written at different times for different reasons. And so this could just be one of those overlaps where you're going from, again, you have some voices that are very concerned with specifics, and they would want to know all these details that are in the genealogy because that's very important to them. And then you have a group of people who are telling the story, which I would say probably that first part of chapter 11 is storytelling. There's not an abundance of really specific information, it's just telling a story. So that could be part of it. But the other thing to remember is, despite all these different voices, we talked about the most recent one that sort of perhaps had kind of a final edit of what we have inherited, took place following the return of the Israelites after the Babylonian exile, rather. So I would argue that if you want to call it the Tower of Babel, it ties into Babylonian. Now, they would not have pronounced Babylonian that way either, but I think that's one way to think of it, is just as we talked about last week, the story about Ham seeing Noah naked and then Canaan getting the curse. You know, that's the reason we don't like the Canaanites. Here's another reason where the Babylonians screwed everything up, because they were trying to be like God. So the other clues that kind of go into that, regardless of my weak attempt at lingual connecting it, but if you look at chapter 10, verse 10, this is on page 11. Well, in chapter 11, it tells us that the story of the tower takes place in the plain of Shamar. So in verse 10, who is it that settles in Shamar?
Europe.
Well, it's the origins of Babylon, the descendants of Nimrod. So this story not only is trying to explain, I think, the reason there's different languages in different places, but it's also a way to pin that as a bad thing on the Babylonians.
Is it possible that also Nimrod was a hunter? The Babylonians were this aggressive
Yes.
Military race.
Well, yes, yeah, and obviously they have their confrontations with the Israelites at various times. Yeah, exactly. So, so the tower was likely a ziggurat, which is, like a pyramid, but with the steps, like a terraced. And it was a common structure in the ancient world. In various places, there's ziggurats in Central America. You can find them, I think, in various different places around the world. And the idea, as it states in the text, was, well, the gods are up there, or God is up there, or whomever. If we build this tower, then we're that much closer to God. So think about that, and think about Israel's future religious structures, where they would worship. First, they had the tabernacle when they were in the wilderness. Eventually, they built the temple in Jerusalem. But those structures tend not to be, the temple was on the hill, but they would not have been towers, per se. So one of the resources I looked at this week suggested that it was kind of the idea that, the Babylonians had to go to their gods, but the God of Israel sat in the temple and waited for God to come to them. So I don't know if that's part of it or not. They do make, in verse 3, they make it very clear that the construction is, they talk about that they're making bricks and baking them, and they use brick instead of stone. And that was important because the Israelites built with stone because it was the superior technology at the time. And so they're even sort of taking a poke at how they built these towers.
Tower as well, that turns up later in one of the battles or something.
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
But where, are there places where there was obviously natural tile?
Well, it does talk about that, doesn't it? In outside of Sodom, there were tar pits.
Yeah,
Or,
and
yeah.
they've got concrete, you couldn't walk through them.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So, a little bit of irony and comic relief in here that they're building this tower to be closer to God. But if you watch the way it's described, God has to come down to see what's going on. Like, they're not even, the idea, they're not even close to that. And,
Scaffolding weren't high enough.
yeah. And, yeah, the purpose of the tower is to keep people from being scattered all over the earth, but ultimately that's what happens.
So this is not the same thing, because you said about worship down at earth, but what about Sinai, Hebron, and all these mountains?
Going up on the mountains. Well, I'm not saying it's a foolproof
Transfiguration, but, yeah.
explanation, but yeah.
Is it because of the clouds that disappeared from view from them?
Could be, yeah,
Who knows?
yeah.
If we look at the verse 4, the second part of verse 4 in 11,
Mhm.
so that they make a name for themselves, getting a bit too big for their boots.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, people thinking more of themselves and
Yes, yeah. And these are the people that are a few generations away from the flood. You know, who you would think would maybe have an inkling of that, you know, in the back of their minds too. But yeah, I think you're right, Barry, well, and it's, so it's kind of an inverse of what we saw a few chapters ago before the flood story. If you remember in chapter 6, part of the problem that God was fed up with before the flood was, you know, it talked about the sons of God, whoever or whatever they were, had come down and were intermarrying with humans. And so the idea that they, you know, here's that going up and coming down language again, they've come down, and in doing so have sort of broken these natural boundaries that are set by God. The sons of God, again, whatever exactly they were part of the heavens and were not designed for the earth, but they violated that natural boundary, and that upsets God. So here you have people trying to go up to God, which again would violate sort of that natural separation, and results in chaos. And then ultimately Babylonians are to blame for everything bad that happens. That's kind of that. Right. Any other thoughts or questions about that bit of the story?
Well, I mean,
Is
the
there-
next one, it jumps back, it says 2 years after the flood, so that's,
Yes,
it's chronologically, it's
yeah.
almost like chapter 10 could go after 11.
It's just kind of, yeah, stuck in there, yeah.
Is there an inference that the brick technology came from Babylon as well, and this is a bad thing?
Well, could be, yeah,
Well, the slaves had to make it eat it, didn't they?
yeah, well, that's right, yeah. Yeah, a lot of different connections you can make and find, and we'll talk about a couple of them here coming up. So chapter 11 then moves on to more genealogy. So the purpose of all of these sets of genealogy is basically to point out that there is one line from Adam to Noah to Abraham. And so if you went back and counted, there's 10 generations from Shem, which was Adam's son, to, no. Did I do that right? Back up. 10 generations from Adam to Noah. 10 generations from Shem to Abraham. So it's, nice round number. And each set of those 10 generations, if you go back and look, ends with a father who has 3 sons. Now, I don't know what that means, but each of them end in that same way.
It all is the beginning of Matthew's Gospel too, doesn't it? Saw some of it.
Yeah, but
It's the numbers thing, you've talked about that.
well, and it's the same concern. Matthew's very concerned with showing that Jesus has this direct line of and, the suggestion is part of this every 10 generation bit is, God creates the world, so Adam, generation 1, you get to Noah, which is the next landmark, and God starts over, and then you get to the next generation with Abraham, and in some ways God kind of starts over again. And so there's kind of that recurring theme. You'll also notice in this section of genealogy in chapter 11 that the lifespans are becoming closer to normal by the end. There's still a few that are, Tara was a sprightly 70 when he started having children, so so it's moving more in that direction. And Mick, I know you're into the numerology bit, so here's your bonus numerology fact. The number of years from the birth of Shem's son to Abram's migration to Canaan is exactly 365. So do with that what you may. Somebody took a lot of time to figure that out, so. Okay, so everybody should have a handy little map. So on the landscape side there is a representation of Abram's journey. The first thing you would notice looking at that map is nobody knows where was. So there's a suggestion it's way down in the southwest along the Euphrates. There's another possibility on this map that's listed at way up in the north. I looked at about a half dozen of these maps online, and I think every one of them had someplace different. So most of these other locations on here are, easier to pinpoint and know historically, but there's several settlements, ancient settlements they found that for various reasons are, thought to be So, depending where it was, if was down in the southwest or southeast rather, along the Euphrates, it was a 600-mile trek to go up to Haran. So that would have been, I can imagine, quite a journey at that time. You think about, it wasn't quick, and what they would take with them. And so it gets us into chapter 12, which is the actual call of Abram, which takes place in Haran, which I notice is spelled differently in our Bibles than it is on the map. It's just one of those discrepancies. So, anything stand out to you about that, well, maybe not even so much conversation, but that invocation by God to call Abram. Anything similar or different from some of the other stories that we've come across so far? I think one of the things that stands out to me is it really contains a lot of blessing. There's at least 3 or 4 times in that short call that God talks about blessing and blessing Abram. You don't hear that so much with Adam and Eve or with Noah is more like, well, I'll give you the animals now and I give you this, but it's, this one very much is about blessing, and there's not really any restriction, or there's not prohibition attached to it, and certainly there's no curse attached to it either, so it's a little bit of a shift from
It
what.
says that Abraham, peoples will be blessed because of Abraham.
Yes.
So he's giving a little bit of sort of godlike quality to Abraham.
Yep.
It didn't say that to Adam or Noah.
No. So it's a different kind of covenant, a different kind of call.
But doesn't this happen again? Isn't later they're always the same, similar wording? It's not the first. It does it several times.
Yeah, it kind of echoes. Yeah, there's a couple of different times. Yeah. The other thing that stands out to me, I think, when you kind of back up and look at it, is how does Abram know God? Comes from wherever is, would certainly appear has traveled through Babylonian territory, is up in Aram, which would have had, their own sets of gods. Let me throw in one other thing. In the book of Joshua, in Joshua 24, verse 2, Joshua says to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods." So Abram comes from a family whose history is worshiping other gods. So it's kind of an interesting, the description we get of this whole interaction is very brief. God shows up, gives this blessing and this call, and then in verse 4, so Abram went, as the Lord had told him. I think it's just kind of an interesting connection that they're, or where is the connection? Where is that connection with Abram?
Based on the traditional route, he went an awful long way round, didn't he?
Yeah.
You thought God would have driven him straight across.
It's not very hospitable. They couldn't feed your flocks there. don't they?
Yeah.
Sharon Desert would have been a bit.
Would Abraham and all these other people,
You need to be near a river.
Yeah,
wouldn't they have known the Noah story, or what we call it? Not interested.
Well, like I said,
Did they know?
they would have had their own, may very well have had their own flood story. We talked about the Babylonian one was Gilgamesh, and I can't recall now what the other one was, but so they probably would have had flood stories, but they may not have been the Hebrew flood story with Noah. So this little bit is something that has troubled or inspired Jewish rabbis over the years, trying to explain how and why Abram was open to this kind of invitation from God. And so, I think I've talked about before, in the Jewish tradition, there is something called midrash, which is a collection of teachings by successive generations of rabbis. And they take the scripture, and if there's something that doesn't make sense or that they are trying to make sense of, they will tell a story or kind of give a backstory to it, and then successive generations will argue with them. So you may have midrash about, the Ten Commandments, say, and there may be entry after entry after entry, and it's successive, it's just this conversation and argument. So the midrash story about the call of Abram goes something like that Terah, his father, doesn't ever really say what he does, what kind of vocation he has, but Terah had a shop where he sold idols of the Mesopotamian or Babylonian or wherever they were, of their gods. And Abram, being the bright young person that he was, started thinking about, well, how is that a god if I can sit there and watch Terah like sculpt it or carve it or whatever he was doing. And Terah was very strict with him, saying, well, these are definitely gods, it's in our interest that these are gods because that's how we make our money. And so one night Abram sneaks into the shop and smashes all the idols, and Terah comes in and says, what are you doing? Costing us a fortune. And Abram says, oh, well, if they're gods, let them fix themselves.
So is that it? That's in the Midrash?
Yes.
Not in the Bible?
No. So, obviously, it's not in the Bible, but it's a bit of a story trying to explain. That's why Abram was wise to this monotheistic approach, because he knew from his experience that the idols were whatever, pieces of wood, pieces of pottery, whatever they were.
He could have had an atheist approach altogether, couldn't he?
Well, he could have, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Maybe that was his first opinion, and then God spoke to him and said, actually, you're a little bit wrong there.
Well, that could be too. Yeah, it doesn't give us a lot of information to think about in that short little story. But the point is, Abram takes off, and they leave Haran, and they eventually make their way southwest down towards the Mediterranean into the land that's now Israel, and sort of settle there. He takes his nephew Lot with him.
Seems a bit unfair to the Canaanites, because it says they're already there, it's the land of Canaan.
Yeah.
And yet God promises Abraham that he'll give the land to all his offspring.
Yeah.
So what about the poor Canaanites? They really seem to have it in for them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and
Jump forward a few millennia.
yeah, well, you see the same thing happening today.
Nothing ever changes.
Well, and if you think about it, the same thing when the Israelites come into the Promised Land. It's the same situation. There's people that live there, but God has given it to them. So, I think this is, we're going to start seeing sort of these recurring themes, these recurring stories, and I think that is, definitely one of them. still happening today, absolutely. Yeah.
People.
And, again, if we think about this from the context of Israelites returning after the exile, there's this story that their patriarch has come out of Babylon and has inherited Canaan. And the Israelites now, out of exile, have come out of Babylon and have returned to Canaan. So they can look at this and say, this is justification, maybe that's their justification for, returning to their rightful place.
Did Abraham regard Lot as his as his son, in a way?
I mean, obviously, there's.
Well, you don't have any wives yet, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, well, I mean, certainly we know at the time, Abram didn't have any sons,
Yeah.
because that becomes important later.
Was Lot due to inherit Abraham? Assuming they had the idea of inheritance.
Yeah, I mean, he very well, he very well may have been. I'm trying to look to see, I think it says that Lot's father, Noah's brother, had died, right?
Yeah. This sort of thing
Yeah.
happened in the Roman imperial families, didn't it? They took their nephew, became the next emperor and so on.
Yeah, well, I mean, the preference would be for a male heir, so,
Yeah.
yeah, very, very possibly. So Lot goes with him.
Would Abraham not have taken Lot's wife under his protective wing, should we say, because that's how they did it in those days, wouldn't it? So effectively he would be a son. Lot's wife.
Yeah.
Very protective wing, wasn't it, as I read it, of his wife.
Oh,
No.
well,
Yeah, well, they all messed up.
yeah,
Basically.
yeah,
And made more enemies for the Israelites later on.
do you mean Lot's mother?
Lot's mother.
Lot's
sorry.
mother,
No,
yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
One
The
nation,
wife,
yeah.
Well, I mean, because we talked about that even when we were studying Ruth, right? About the whole,
Yes,
sort of familial obligation to protect widows,
Yeah.
because of their vulnerability. So, I mean, very likely that's probably all part of that story. So, take a quick time out from the story and look at something else that's going on here in, okay. Well, my notes aren't exactly accurate, but anyway, the way in which God's name is represented in the text has changed again. If we go back to chapter 1, how does the text, how is God referred to? God, yeah. God said, let there be light, and there was light. Right, so if we go to chapter 2, see, this is gonna, the Lord God, yes. So the name, in chapter 1, where God's name is God, that is the English equivalent of Elohim, which was one of the Jewish names for God. Chapter 2, Lord God, is Jehovah. So if you flip back to chapter 11 or 12,
It's just the Lord.
it's the Lord. So when you see God referred to, and this is primarily in the first 5 books of the Bible that you'll see this a lot, but throughout the Old Testament, if God's referred to as Lord,
That's online.
it's Yahweh. Adonai is connected though, because Adonai means Lord. And so, you know, the Jews have a prohibition about pronouncing the name of God. And so what we're seeing in chapter 12 is the use of what's called the tetragrammaton, which is the 4 letters that in Hebrew are written as God's name. Now, in written Hebrew, there's no vowels, so you would have to know the context in order to fill in the vowels to make the words work. So you might see it occasionally as YHWH, all capitals, right? And so because there are no written vowels, it's not clear at all how that would have been pronounced, but that may also have been the idea, is you don't know how to pronounce it, so you can't pronounce it, so that keeps you safe. So it often comes referred to as Yahweh, YHWH. In Hebrew, those letters are Yod, He, Vav, He. So I guess if you say that quickly enough together, it kind of turns into Yahweh. So the ancient Jews, when they were writing, often instead of putting that in and risking exposing God's name, would have written as Adonai, which means Lord. And so in the Bible, in the English Bible, whenever the original text refers to God as Adonai, then you see it as Lord.
Well, the 23rd Psalm uses that.
Yes, yes, that's right, that's right. So again, it's one of those things that scholars can use to go through and figure out when different things may have been written and by whom, because of the name that they would use or the way that they would refer to God, changed over time and in different contexts. Confuse everybody? Okay. All right.
When they're reading in the synagogue, what do they say when they get to the magic word?
So I'm trying to think in English, like in their prayers. I'll pull up a prayer next time and bring it in.
I mean, I've seen things written by Jewish pupils,
Yeah,
and they will write in the RE, this is horror, and they'd write a capital G with a line,
yeah.
and leave it at that.
A lot of
But
times,
you don't know what they're thinking, what.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times in contemporary English writing, you'll see the G with a long dash after it.
Yeah.
If it's a Jewish scholarly. Now, I think it also depends upon which flavor of Judaism it is, as to how, do you know? Do you have?
I mean, my experience is that they would use Yahweh
Okay,
primarily.
okay, yeah.
Is that what's in the Torah, is it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so like here, what's in the Torah is Adonai, in this case, Elohim, Jehovah. Yeah, it just kind of depends, yeah, where it is. I'll pull up a couple of their,
Because you know, every service they're reading, someone has
Yeah.
to read it.
yeah,
And you're not allowed to touch the book and all
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
yeah.
Little finger, right? But what do they just miss that word
Yeah.
out? Everyone knows this word.
I'll try to figure that out.
But no more than we do in our modern prayers. We don't always address God.
No,
No, but we use words like Lord and,
Yeah.
but I wonder what they use when they're reading their scriptures. Can't just, it don't make
well,
sense. if you
again,
just-
like here, they'd be okay saying Adonai.
Okay, so maybe there's a tradition. of
So
that.
it's not God's name, it's a,
Just means
well, it's like
Dominus,
saying Lord.
Like Dominus, yes, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so if we recognize that sort of prohibition, yeah, we would pray Lord or Father or,
Yeah.
you know, some other sort of, yeah,
Form of address.
form of address, and just would avoid saying God. But if the minister stood up front and said, Lord, blah, 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 I would just like, if we stood up on Sunday and prayed to Lord, you know, everyone would know, oh, that's God, that's, you know. So I think it's that kind of an idea. It's just,
different ideas, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
actually what is in the, as the front in the Elms News, she always starts Father God,
yeah, yeah,
but we don't very often use that. It's not a common one that we use in our prayers.
yeah. Well, it's just, depends what you're used to, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, back to the story, I'm jumping along, so if I skip something that you're interested in, let me know. But in chapter 12, so we're on page 13 here. So God has called Abram. Abram has gathered up his family, and he says he's 75 at this time. Took all their possessions, all the people they'd acquired, and set out for the land of Canaan. They're there for some period of time, and then in verse 10 we find out there's a famine in the land. And Abram and his group go down to Egypt to live there because the famine was severe. So what's that remind us of?
Joseph.
Joseph? Yeah, yeah. And then there's kind of this bit about his wife Sarai.
Why'd she get the blame? She's female, I guess.
Yeah. So essentially, Abram says, look, you're good looking. They're gonna kill me so they can have you, so let's just pretend we're brother and sister and then I'll be fine.
How old is this good-looking woman at this stage? Because I suspect she's
Well,
200 years old.
one of the commentaries said, and I quoted this because it was interesting, apparently Sarah is a hot 65-year-old. That's what it said.
There's quite a few of those.
But, you know, but as Abram suspected, you know, she must have been something because she went straight up the ladder to Pharaoh. And,
But you should use the word Pharaoh as well there.
yeah,
Why did they, you know, the leader in Egypt, or suddenly it becomes, probably the title Pharaoh doesn't exist then, does it?
oh, well, I don't know. Maybe they're reading that back in.
Yeah.
Well, but we're also gonna get into some other reasons why that might be. So Pharaoh basically takes her as a wife, and Abram gets rich, and then verse 17, but the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai.
It doesn't say what she's done though, does it? What she did. Is it just?
No, but I think the implication is God's mad because he's taken someone else's wife. I think that's the curse is not on her, it's on Pharaoh.
Right, okay.
So Pharaoh summons Abraham. Why, what have you done to me? He said. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister? So I took her to be my wife. Now then, here's your wife, take her and go. And they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. So what do we do with that? Abram comes out, all the better, because he's
Yeah.
rich now. It's an interesting bit of the story, and it's the first of 3 stories like that in
Did Abraham
Genesis.
get rich all that, those riches because she was, his so-called sister?
Well, it just says
So Pharaoh looked after him.
yeah, Pharaoh treated Abram well.
In the same way as Joseph was
Mhm.
elevated
Yeah,
through the,
It says he treated Abram well for her sake.
yeah,
yeah, that's what it does say, doesn't it?
yeah.
But that's what Joseph was treated well because of his diplomatic skills or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess this is making peace with your brother-in-law, sort of. I mean, I think that's kind of the idea, is that, you know, yeah. It's just a strange bit of the story. And, again, they will do the same thing in chapter 20, Abram and Sarah, and then in chapter 26, Isaac and Rebekah have a story where it's the same. He passes her off as his sister. Yeah. So, yeah, part of the story. It's part of the story. So anyway, so Abram has acquired wealth now. It looks like he had some wealth beforehand, but he's got camels now, so you know he's made it. And he goes back home. So that story, minus maybe the bit about Sarai. What else? What other story does that remind us of a little bit? So,
Well, Jesus, no.
well, I mean, Jesus has an episode in Egypt.
Yeah,
Um,
it's the other way around, isn't it?
Well, so I'm thinking like the Exodus story. So the Israelites come out of Egypt, and they've kind of taken all their stuff, and the bit about some translations, English translations in verse 17 talk about the Lord inflicting plagues on Pharaoh.
Yes,
Yeah.
So that language echoes,
So the Exodus Pharaoh originally tells them to go, you can go now.
yeah,
Changes his
and then he
mind
changes his
later on.
mind, that's right. Well, and, you know, they had to take everything they have. And Pharaoh in Exodus, after being struck by plagues, summons Moses and basically says, "What are you doing?
Mhm.
What have you caught? What have you done to me?" In a roundabout way. So it's almost like a little mini Exodus story, or certainly has some connections there. So they go back to Canaan. Lot isn't really mentioned when they're in Egypt, but it talks about that Lot went with him when they went back, so he must have come along for the trip. And Abraham there it says, has become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. So at some point, there is some disagreement, fighting between Abram's people and Lot's people. And they both would have had lots of livestock with them, probably as much as could be at the time, a pretty substantial setup. They would have had, the concept of slavery was a little bit different at that time. Some of these people would have been slaves, but they would have been probably closer to what we would consider like servants, where they worked for the family, so they would have had a pretty large entourage, I would say. Lot would have had one, Abram would have had one. And so they're trying to probably keep all their livestock separate and all their, everything separate, and arguments break out, and Abram says, let's split up, pick where you wanna go, and I'll go the other way. So what does Lot pick?
Abraham gives Lot the first choice,
Yeah,
even though Abraham was the,
yes,
he's sort of the generation older.
yeah, yeah,
We took the best place, didn't we?
Yeah, he put a place that was like the garden, he thought was like the Garden of Eden.
yeah, yeah. So he goes down the plain outside of Sodom, and Abram goes towards Hebron, which is a more elevated area. So you can see Hebron on that map, south of Jerusalem. So then chapter 14, so the other side of your map has a map about the events of chapter 14, which can get confusing because there's a lot of different kings and locations and all of that. Anyone want to sum up the action of chapter 14?
There was lots of fighting.
Lots of fighting.
Lots of kings fighting other kings.
Yes, yes.
One group of kings against another group.
Battle of the Nine Kings.
Battle of the Nine Kings, yes.
It's like saying out Tolkien.
Yeah, it does.
The Hobbit.
Yeah,
Lord of the Rings. Yes.
it very much does. And
And lots gets captured.
Lot gets, yes, Lot gets captured. And
Didn't think a lot.
Abram comes with, not too many men, how many? 318 men that Abram has at his disposal, and he pursues, so there's a handful of, let me back up. The story basically is, there are some, this is where the language gets tricky, kingdoms in the area that Abram and Lot are living in, that are basically puppet states of other kingdoms elsewhere. And the local kingdoms have sort of quit paying their tributes or aren't cooperating with the more distant powers. So the allies from a distance, which would be Kedorlaomer and, well, I'm not even gonna go through them because I won't pronounce them correctly, but in verse 5, you start seeing this list of these allies, and they form up and they come down. That's the black line descending through your map, and they do battle with these local kings, as it were, and so on their way back to the north, they're looting everything, and they take, among other things, Lot. And it talks about, they see in verse 14:11, the four kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all of their food, and they went away, and they also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions. So Abram gets his little small army, and they pursue the kings, and Abram attacks them at night and defeats them. recovers all the goods, and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions, together with the women and the other people. So if you look on the map, there's the blue arrows showing where Abram was living in relation to Sodom and Gomorrah. And then it says that he attacks them at Dan. It's about 120 miles from Mamre, I don't know how you pronounce that exactly, to Dan. And then another 40 miles from Dan to Damascus, which is he pursues the kings after he attacks them. So 160 miles worth of pursuit involved in this. When we read the story in here, it almost sounds like, well, it's the next night he goes out and he gets him back. You know, this was obviously a significant, and you can see there's a spine of mountains that run through this area as well. So it would have been quite the maneuver to pull that off. But Abram succeeds and he comes back.
How old is he? He's pretty old now, isn't he?
890.
Yeah,
Age is relative.
Age is relative.
Abram's mates, isn't he?
yeah,
And
yeah.
he's trained men.
There you go, there you go. And so then at the
Did
end,
he pay them as a, what is it you call a paid soldier?
mercenary? Well, I think the implication is that, you know, he was living, where he was living was close to, you know, well, others who would have had sizable holdings the way that he did, and they were probably all kind of, you know, looked out for each other, so it was his men and the neighbor's men and the neighbor's neighbor's men, and that would have been,
It's not a
Where-
raffle, is it? It says it's trained.
yeah, well, yeah,
These
yeah.
are relatively small armies and battles. When
Well,
you
it
read
would-
later on in David about
Yes.
there's thousands and thousands and thousands of them.
Well, it doesn't really say how many from the kings that have come in and attacked. Now, I mean, one of the things, and we can talk about, okay, you know, it's 160 miles here, but I mean, this is still a relatively smallish area, but there's all these kings set up. So, again, these aren't kings, maybe in the sense of Nebuchadnezzar or David or later Pharaoh. These are probably, you know, this is the king of Cranham and the king of Upminster, and that sort of a thing, just smaller settlements. And it's the guy that's in charge, you know.
Would they actually be fixed settlements? I mean, these kings, because it was nomadic time, wasn't it?
Well, no, I'm
People
sure they
were
would have,
moving around,
I'm sure they
so-
would have moved around, but
Yeah,
you know, whatever, you know, family group, or
yeah.
probably larger than a family group, but whatever kind of group was together, that was their leader. So, so they may not have been, yeah, massive armies. You know, if Abram splits his in half and defeats them, and he's only starting with 300,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, it would seem, yeah. But, so Abram becomes sort of a war hero, and then at the end, we get a visit from Melchizedek. So this is starting in verse 17. After Abram returned, and the king of Sodom came out to meet with him in the valley of Shaveh, which is the King's Valley. Then Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. So that's kind of again, kind of a strange,
Is this another word for God here?
well, you have God Most High.
Right, so Melchizedek is actually a monotheist as well.
Yes,
He's monotheistic as well as Abraham.
yes, yeah, and he's listed as a priest.
Yeah,
Of
how,
God.
how does that happen?
Well, there you go, yeah.
Had he had a chat with God that we don't know about?
Well, so it's, so he, again, is mentioned in these few verses, and really becomes this outsized, sort of character. Psalm 110, verse 4, which is, on 6:13. Yep. Mentions him. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And then later in the book of Hebrews, the letter to the Hebrews, he's mentioned 8 times, Melchizedek is. Primarily as a prototype of Christ's priesthood. So the author of Hebrews is drawing this direct sort of line between the priest Melchizedek and Jesus as high priest. So the only clues really to who or where he may have come from, he's listed as the king of Salem. Which is kind of generic term, but would have been in the area of Jerusalem. Yeah, yeah. So possibly he was the king, an early king of Jerusalem, like a pre-Davidic sort of king. But there's no other, we haven't read anything else about Jerusalem so far, or anything about their commitment to a monotheistic God, or that they had priests and all this. So it's just kind of a mysterious, just a mysterious appearance. And he doesn't come up again, like you said. He shows up, those other references are the only other times he shows up in the Bible. Brief reference in Psalms, and then again in Hebrews. But he kind of comes from nowhere and then just kind of disappears back.
Is there any link between Abraham gave him a tenth of everything and tithing? Do you think?
Well, I mean, probably it's a model for tithing, but later when you get to that, when the Israelites are commanded to give a tithe, I mean, it kind of explicitly comes from God, that there's a rule about that. There doesn't appear to be anything in Abram's experience then that has, that would reference that. So that, again, may be, and we talked last time too, about someone who's writing this down, obviously at a much later date than when it occurred, might be reading back into it some of their expectations and practices. Oh, well, you know, if that happened now, we'd give them a tenth, you know, or whatever. But it doesn't really, it's also curious, because why is he giving him a tenth of everything?
Is it-
And what is everything?
Well, when Abraham defeated them, he got back the goods that they'd taken from
Yeah.
the other kings.
Yeah,
So is he just giving him back some of what was stolen?
well, and that might be, but then it also is curious because the king says to Abram, give me the people and keep the goods for yourself. And Abram's like, I don't want any of it. So, yeah, so I mean, the whole thing is just kind of curious as to, what did he give him a tenth of? So, anyway. I looked in 3 different Bible dictionaries, and that's the extent of the information you can find on Melchizedek. So it is just one of those.
I recognise the name, but it's in the epistles, isn't it? Yeah, so probably heard it most.
Well, Hebrews, it's in there. It's, there's a musical oratorio or something about Melchizedek, I think.
Oh, maybe I've seen it
That might be where
as
you've
some
seen it.
obscure.
Yeah. So, anyway, whoever he was,
I thought the prototype priest was Aaron, Moses'
Well,
brother.
yeah, that's it, yeah.
And the Levites and.
Yeah, so, yeah, but he's really, he's the first one that shows up, so, kind of like the sons of God and the Nephilim and all these other interesting connections that come up. Right. Any questions about any of that? Well, other than all the ones that we can't answer.
I would like that in the Dr. Reuben.
Well, after all that, I thought maybe our closing song, we could do something a little lighter that we didn't have to give a lot of thought to, so let me.
Not about battles,
I don't know if this is a song that you teach the kids over here or not. I didn't learn this as a kid, I learned it later, but it's a kid's song.